All right, welcome everyone and happy Wednesday. You're here with the USC Marshall School of Business Executive Education team. This course is Maintaining Performance Engagement. We'll be getting started in just a bit. So in a couple more minutes, as people trickle in, we will just begin. All right, we'll get started. So once again, happy Wednesday. My name is Jenny Walker. I'm an account manager with the USC Marshall School of Business Executive Education team. And thank you guys for joining us. This will be an active webinar where everyone will participate in breakout room activities with others. So we invite you to actively participate in this webinar in multiple modalities, whether it's listening through chat using the chat box below, which you'll see right now. For some of you guys will be orange. And you can chat any questions you might have or comments below, or video using your webcams with your microphones on. But please feel free to mute yourself if you'd like, okay? A recording of this webinar and copies of the slides will be presented along with the resource sheet. They'll be emailed to you by end of day tomorrow. On today's webinar, my fabulous colleagues in executive education, Adam Tacurio, Tim Koo, and Olga Malinowska. Olga and Adam will be responding to any of the chats during the webinar. So if anytime you have a question or anything like that, feel free to type it in the box. Actively engaged. They'll be asking questions throughout the webinar, okay? All right, so next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Blakesley, the Assistant Dean of Marshall School of Business Executive Education. Prior to joining USC, Tim spent over 28 years in professional services, most recently as a Managing Director and Global Leader of the BTS Leadership Practice. Tim has worked with Fortune 500 companies such as Toyota, SAP, Genentech, Pfizer, Amgen, Nike, and Sony, assisting in the development of their leaders. Tim is also a certified coach with the Marshall Goldsmith Center of Coaching. And one little known fact about Tim is that he's also a licensed private pilot. Tim, I turn it over to you, our fearless leader.
Oh, Jenny, thank you. And just as importantly, thank you to everyone who has joined us today. I know that you have a lot of choices of what you can use with your time in attending these type of webinars. So we're really appreciative that you chose to spend time with us. If you attended our previous webinars, the first one was on sort of setting up your remote workspace, since we were all suddenly sort of thrown into that. The second webinar looked at how do you be a better leader virtually. This one's going to take a little bit of a double click down into that leading virtually piece and look and say, you know, what is our role as leaders in maintaining engagement at times of crisis? And so just as Jenny said, we want to make this interactive and have some fun and get you engaged. So right out of the gate, I'd love for you to type into the chat box your response to this. Let us know what industry you're with, whether that's technology, manufacturing, finance, healthcare, some other. How long you've been a leader, if you don't want to type a number in that, if you want to just put sort of new to leadership, maybe mid-career, a seasoned leader, or maybe you don't yet lead people, but you have aspirations of being a people leader. Happy to have you do that. And then maybe number of direct reports. How many people do you currently supervise? So I've put my example here. I've been in professional services for about 28 years as a leader, and currently I have a team of 13. So let's look here. Let's see. I'm not surprised. A lot of our higher education colleagues, thank you for joining. Looks like maybe new to leadership. Good. Some commercial real estate. Fantastic. 5 years of leadership. Wow, approximately 30. I want to talk about, that's a large span of control. I want to talk about that today as we look at engagement. Some from the healthcare industry. Oh, fantastic. Entertainment. Glad some folks from entertainment have joined us. Philanthropy. We've got nonprofit, public sector, medical. Excellent. And it does look like we've got a nice range of experience. That's good. Thank you for sharing that, because that's going to help me kind of gauge how to talk about this idea of being a leader at these crisis moments. With that, let me kind of share where I think we'd like to be at the end of this webinar. First, I kind of want to explore sort of the evolution that's been happening in the workplace that has impacted performance management. Then I'd like to look at and evaluate how that employee engagement is impacted by the leader. We're going to look at the change curve and how we as leaders have an impact on that. And then finally look at sort of goals and how we can continue to help people be aligned and productive during these times of crisis. It was probably Ram Charan that gives us a good framework here. And as you look at this, I don't want you to think about this so much as a hierarchy, but more as job responsibility being increased. And what Ram Charan talks about here in the leadership pipeline is these passages. So he talks about these transitions as the passages that we make. And if you think about, like, for example, going from managing others to managing managers, he definitely talks about how we have to acquire new things, right? So there's new knowledge, capabilities, skills as we, increase our responsibilities and roles. But more importantly, he talks about what do we need to let go of? And that's no more critical than at that very first passage of going from managing self to managing others. So think about this, right? What are we rewarded and recognized on managing self? It's our individual contribution. With that first turn is that time when we go to managing others, that it's critical that we are getting results through the actions of others. And so that let go becomes a very critical piece of, are we delegating and maximizing all of that talent and potential that exists in our teams? It was Peter Drucker, and of course, Peter Drucker, world-renowned expert thought leader in the area of management. Anything we do today in management was touched by Peter Drucker's philosophies. And he talks about how that first passage is all about the role of the manager is to obtain results. And I've added here voluntary actions of others. I want to come back to the voluntary piece in just a moment. Before I do so, though, let's look at some of the things that were happening before the COVID-19 crisis that's upon us, and just kind of what was happening with performance management that led up to even the time right before. So if we go back just as early as 1982, 60% of our gross domestic product was tangible assets. We were a manufacturing economy with only about 40% intangible. Now fast forward just a mere 28 years, and that's almost a 180-degree flip, right? Only 15% tangible assets, 85% intangible. Think about that right-hand side as the gig economy, right? What Amazon has done to distribution, right? They don't create the books, they have no brick and mortar, but it's all done through an amazing distribution channel. You can also think of Uber, right? Uber is often talked about as being the largest global transportation company, and they don't have a single transportation asset, right? They don't own the vehicles that they are able to transport people. And so if we think about performance management on the left side, that's more of that hierarchical, I'm the boss, I control, I dole out information as I see you needing it. On the left-hand side, that model no longer holds up, right? And you may have been experiencing in your organizations already transformations of the way we think about how we lead people. In fact, we can look at it and think about, there we go. We're actually talking about going from the hierarchy to the wirarchy, right? We've flattened our organizations, and it's much more about the interconnectedness that goes at all levels this way instead of this way. And so this is about that interconnectedness of people, the sharing of knowledge and information. Thinking about leading and empowering and performance managing in this situation takes a different set of leadership skills, because now it's not the I'm the boss and I'm going to tell, but the knowledge and the information that might exist is over here somewhere in the organization. If we're not engaging and connecting leaders and allowing that innovation to take place, we're not being effective as leaders today. So let's think about how that's impacted the actual worker. It used to be that I worked 9 to 5. Well, that's gone out the window here during our current circumstances for sure. I clocked in, I left at 5. But now, especially during this time, we need to think about, it's about effort and not about what gets done between a certain set of hours. For example, you on your team might set up and say, okay, you need to be available from, let's say, 7 until 10. And then maybe we have a coworker that from 10 until 2, they've got to help homeschool their children under these circumstances. And so they come back online in the evening to catch up on emails and et cetera. Well, when we even go back to the workplace, we need to continue that philosophy and say, what makes sense for our team? What makes sense for our work, rather than looking at the clock as sort of the guide? Next, we look at, and I need to move my camera here, we used to go to a corporate office, right? Now, even before the COVID, it wasn't unusual to see people working from a Starbucks or a WeWork, right? Working doesn't have to be in a physical facility any longer. We used to use company equipment. You know, when I clocked in at 5, I went to work, I used the company computer, and when I came home, I didn't have a laptop, so my time was mine. Unfortunately, we could also say that use of any device, anytime, anywhere, has impacted our quality of life, which could be a whole nother conversation. We used to be focused on inputs, now we're focused on outputs, and it used to be about climbing the corporate ladder. Now I create my own ladder. So what this means is, if you think about people that work with you, they have choices, right? It used to be that I signed up for an organization and I climbed the corporate ladder. Now it might be about, okay, where's the next place that's going to have cool work where I can do my next gig? And so when we think about retaining top talent, are we engaging and developing people so that we're retaining our best and helping them create their corporate ladder with us? So here's a definition, right? Let's define performance management. And this is more of a modern approach. What I love about this one is this word involves. You know, unfortunately, a lot of managers think that performance management is that darn form that I have to fill out for HR. We are performance management, right? In fact, Drucker talks about the leader, the most immediate supervisor is the person responsible for obtaining that performance. And it really is about the performance, not completing the checklist, the form, the evaluation, but the conversations, the coaching, the making sure that we get everybody aligned on an ongoing basis. So this is the definition we're going to work with going forward. Ultimately, in short, it's about collaborative achievement, right? Are we maximizing the potential of everybody in that hierarchy? Well, let's do a little test. We said that we were going to engage you. Let's make that happen right now. On the screen, you should be seeing there's 10 statements here. Some of these might be myths. Some of these might be realities. Don't know what the mix is. We'll figure that out. But in a moment, what we're going to have you do is we're going to put you into breakout groups. And by the way, this should have been emailed to you. You've got a link. I think it's Google Docs. If you haven't downloaded that, it's also in the chat box. Tim just put that in the chat box for you. If one of the people on your team, once you get into the breakout group, can share that on their screen, or you can take a screenshot of this also and have it available. If the sharing doesn't work, you can just read them out loud. And then what I'd like for you to do is have a great discussion. Debate and discuss. Do you think this is a management myth, or do you think this is a management reality? Now, you can also take a few seconds to introduce each other, but don't take too much time because you're only going to have 12 minutes to accomplish this task. And also, if you get stuck on any one of the myths or realities, maybe leave that one and come back to it. Some of these you'll debate and you'll go, oh yeah, that's a myth. Nope, that's a reality. And then come back to the ones that maybe you struggled with a little bit on. So with that, again, just these are the 10. You're going to have those with you in the breakout room. Again, if you just want to read them one at a time, if you can't actually share them on your screen, don't let that be a hindrance. And in 12 minutes, we will have you come back and we'll see which ones you got right and which ones maybe we all can discuss a little bit further. So Tim, are we set to have folks go into breakout rooms?
Ready to go.
Fantastic. Please enjoy the experience of working with and meeting some other folks. Looks like we're almost all back. Welcome back. We were hovering in some of the breakout rooms. Sounds like it was a great discussion going on. I appreciate that. That was actually the whole intent. It's not about getting these right or wrong. What I wanted was your sort of thinking and getting to talk to peers and colleagues about some of the things you're seeing around these myths and realities. And by the way, I was on a webinar myself last week, and it had some of the top executives at corporations like IBM, actually the NBA was there. And these are this chief human resource officers, chief learning officers. And we were talking about leadership and what sort of needs to change or be different. And what we agreed was coming out of COVID, there are going to be some changes to HR structure and the way we do business. But what we all agreed was that during these times of challenge, the things I'm about to go through are tried and true leadership practices. Whether it's during our regular times or during these crises times, these are the leadership fundamentals that are paying off for us, if you will. So let's have some fun. Let's get into this. Let's go to the first one. More often than not, employees join the company but quit their bosses. This actually used to be a bit provocative back when it was first released, but I think this one everybody probably got. It is a reality. So let's think about this one, right? I join an organization because of its culture, because of the cool work that it's doing, because of the people that I might get to work with. But again and again, as we find in exit interviews, the number one reason that comes up for leaving an organization is my immediate supervisor. So let's think about this during the COVID-19. How am I showing up? What am I doing that is, keeping our employees engaged and wanting to stay with an organization is just as critical now as any other time, and maybe even especially more so now. Let's maybe try a chat box on this one. What do you think? Myth or reality? Type in the chat box. Companies positioned to win in the future spend 10 to 15% more of their leaders' time strengthening their talent pool. Is this a myth or reality? Let's see what a few. Reality. Well, we got one myth, reality, a couple of myths showing up. This one's a little bit of a gotcha.
Yeah,
it is true. What's that, Elaine?
The percentage is what
exactly. If you've debated the percentage, it's actually 30%. This comes from research from McKinsey, but I've seen it replicated in other places. Because we've made that shift to the intangible asset side of that right-hand column, now it has become even more critical that we look at our talent, that we look at our people, because we're getting it done through people even more so. So this is an important message during these critical times as we think about retaining the talent that we have and focusing on development. And I'll talk about that in one of the other myths. Again, type it in. What do you think? Myth or reality? Among the strongest drivers of motivation are connection to purpose, achievement of mastery, and higher levels of autonomy. Do we see here? Yeah, you all got this one. Again, this one used to be provocative when it first came out. I want to spend a little time on this one. This comes from Daniel Pink, Drive What Truly Motivates. And if we think back to the left side of the typical hierarchical performance management, the carrot and the stick, right? We give carrots, rewards, and recognize, and we punish and use the stick when people are not performing. That actually, according to the research, is not what motivates us greatly. And as I put in the definitions to these, I'd be curious, go ahead in the chat box. How are you seeing purpose, mastery, and autonomy show up during this time of the pandemic? So purpose is that bigger meaning, right? It's something bigger than myself. We're actually seeing in organizations now, when especially Gen X and Gen Z are looking at where to work, it is this whole idea of ESG. At the most corporate director level, right? ESG is environmental social governance. Is my company doing something about global warming? Are we helping social issues? And so this idea of when I show up at work, can I connect my purpose to the organizational purpose? So as we think about this time of pandemic and crisis, I'm sure we're seeing innovation and people on our teams sort of have this creativity and innovation to find ways to link to purpose and giving back to the community. And so it becomes a critical part as a boss, as a leader, am I paying attention to this with each individual person on my team? Mastery is also an interesting one. This one says, why do I spend my weekends strumming a guitar when I know I'll never play at Carnegie Hall? It's because we want to continue on this path of getting better. Right? And we think about this on the job. Can I master my job in new ways? Can I find different sort of ways of mastering it? Which leads us to the last point, autonomy. We've all had those diminisher bosses, as Liz Wiseman would say. Liz Wiseman did some research in the Silicon Valley and wrote a very provocative book. She was the chief learning officer at Oracle, but the book is called Multipliers. And what we know, the number one diminishing behavior is this micromanaging behavior of a leader, right? So what autonomy says is, tell me what you want, but let me figure out how to get it done. And I think we're seeing a lot of autonomy in this critical period because sort of the old ways of doing things, we've had to be innovative and allow the team to have autonomous ways of working. So let's just see here. I've seen a shift in purpose, more humanitarian, absolutely. Our company, a plasma-driven therapy, by the way, thank you for, if we do have any essential businesses and first responders, thank you for everything you're doing to put yourself, your families at risk, to be able to help all of us do what we need to do. Yeah, an even greater sense of purpose. Thank you, Mike. Mike Thompson said that we're seeing even greater sense of purpose. I've heard, you know, industries make pivots where they might have been manufacturing something, but now on the fly, making things like masks and et cetera, and changing our businesses in a fast way to change our purpose. Let's move on. The ability of the workforce to manage and cope with change has become the number one. I'm not going to even have you type in this one if this is absolutely a reality. And this was true before we got to the pandemic. What we're living in is what's called a VUCA world, and that we borrowed from the US military. Stands for volatile, right? It used to be we wrote these 10 to 15 year business plans and then we spent our time executing. Well, now we're lucky if that as a 3 to 5 year business plan because there's this volatility in the global market that makes us respond faster as businesses. Then we have this uncertainty. We don't know where the next business might come and niche us, right? Then we have complexity. The world and business is more complex than it's ever been. And then it's ambiguous. All we have to do is see our certain situation. We don't have the data to make well-informed decisions. And so this ambiguity makes us make our best attempts and best tries. But even like coming out of this, when should, and by the way, I'm hearing more and more now, it's not when do we go back, but how do we go back? We need a strategy to be able to do that. So in this VUCA world, even, you know, in this situation, when we go back, it's still going to be VUCA. And so as leaders, are we addressing the fact that it's VUCA and leading in a way that addresses that? And we'll get to that in a moment in the change curve, which is right now. This is from William Bridges, Managing Transitions. It isn't the change that people resist, it's the transition. And what he means by that is the change itself is external, right? That's the new system that we have to go to, the new boss, the new organization, new team, what have you. The change is the change, and that we manage. We can have project plans, Gantt charts, etc. The transition as a leader is I facilitate that change because that's unique to each person. It's my reaction to the change. And so what Bridges talks about, and by the way, this is going to be a mental model, and mental models are great so that we can have conversations, but please realize it's not an absolute and not every person or every team might go through this, but it gives us a way to actually frame it and think about it. So if we put performance on the vertical axes and time across the horizontal axes, there are actually 3 phases. There's the ending of the old way of doing it, right? And then we want to get to the new beginning, the new way we do things. In between is what he calls the transition zone. And at the transition zone, or at the beginning, we might see uncertainty. We'll see skepticism typically at the, you know, the transition phase. Then we get into exploration and ultimately, we want to get to some level of commitment. Well, in any given change, we're likely to see a productivity dip because we're trying to figure things out, right? Now, what's interesting is even during times like this, you still might have people above the mean that are excited about the change. They're anticipating the change. You know, thinking about a system, I hated that old way of doing it. I can't wait to get on the new platform. We're seeing this with the COVID, right? Wow, you know, let's figure this out. How do we work from home fast? Because I know for my exec ed team, Friday we were at work, Monday we were working from home. There was no training program. There was no, you know, slow entry. It was, we just had to get it done. Now on the downside, we might see team members of ours being confused, have reservations, denial, and the real sense of loss, right? Even if it's a system, I might have designed that system and I really don't want to give it up. And so there's a loss of having done it the old way. We might see in the transition zone creativity and innovation. There might be those that are more anxious, resistant, confused. Then, of course, we can see ambivalence, uncertainty, but of course, where we want to get to is this idea of high energy and learning. Out of curiosity, type into your box, as we are working from home and having to make this transition, what are some of the words that you would use to describe where some of your team members are right now in this curve? As you're doing that, let me say that this is not a one and done. And here's my thought to you. It's once we get through this change, let's say that it's working from home, and for us, we've been on this now for 5 weeks. What you could see is people going backwards now that they're now that they're comfortable with the working from home part, but anxiety might show up. Well, what's next? And how are we going to deal with this? And so please, as a leader, understand that this is dynamic and it's ongoing. And we need to really pay attention to where our teams individually are in this. Oh, this is great. I'm seeing a lot of creativity, exploration, definitely some anxiety, Lori says. Some lonely, some excited, some uncertain. I love that point. Again, Mike, thank you for bringing it up, that these are individuals, right? And no, we're not going to go through as a group. We need to deal with each person, which let me move forward a little bit quickly here. In the resources, you're going to get some suggestions for us as leaders, what we can do at each phase. What Bridges suggests to us is we need to pay particular attention to certain things at certain times. So for example, in the beginning or at the ending phase, this is where we really need to show up and be present. We really need to listen. We really need to get the sense of where is the person in the change. By the way, that third bullet down, explain why this transformation and the WIFM. This is a very popular HR term if you're not familiar with it. What's in it for me? In typical transformations, especially when things are ending, people need to understand of what am I giving up and what's in it for me if I take on the new. So I just want to make sure I called that out. In the transition zone, this is where we need to be a little more inspirational. We need to encourage that early exploration, early adopters, help recognize and reward people that as they get small wins. And then of course, finally, when we get to the new beginning, this is where we really need to show a lot of appreciation, reward and recognition. I'll come back to the reward and recognition when we get to sort of that myth and reality. Let's go on to the next myth and reality. And again, if you didn't get those, we're going to give you those suggestions in the takeaway at the end. In a recent US-based survey, 65% of performers said they received no positive reinforcement in the workplace. This can't possibly be true, 65%. And I see Elaine shaking her head. Yep, it is unfortunately a reality. This came from some of the same Gallup organization research in the First Break All the Rules that Marcus Buckingham, when he first started studying this. Think about this. In our normal working situations, 65% say they didn't get any sort of reward and recognition. And I want to be clear here. This is not bonuses, some sort of, we dole out, cards and what have you. This could be something as simple as, hey, I heard you with that client and I thought you did a great job. So as we are in this situation of working from home, this one becomes even more imperative that we're pausing and taking time to make sure we're rewarding and recognizing our team members, both in private, but even at, when we're on group team Zoom meetings weekly or what have you. Because this one is a powerful motivator, as we saw from the terms of purpose and autonomy. While 74% of executives view performance management as critical for success, only half believe their organization manages performance effectively. This is another one of those percentages. It's a myth. Only 18% of executives, for talking CEOs, COOs, senior vice presidents, think that the way their organization is managing performance management is effective. What that says is, again, if we think performance of management is us, managers having frequent conversations, giving good feedback, developing people, our senior executives still think we've got a way to go on this. Another thing that while we're in this time of working from home, are we paying attention to those things that make good performance management? Companies with high scores on all aspects of engagement outperform their sectors in terms of earnings by growth by almost 50%. We had a little bit of fun on the percentage on this one too. It's actually good news. It is a myth, but it's 8%, and that's phenomenal, right? If you think about, we finally have something in human performance, engagement scores, that we can show that it relates to customer satisfaction, it relates to employee satisfaction, it relates to top line, bottom line revenue. In fact, one organization that I'm aware of that actually puts in their annual report, SAP, they have said that a 1% increase in an employee engagement scores relates to 40 to 50 million euros in top line revenue. Now think about that. A 1% shift in engagement has that kind of an impact just on one measure, which is revenue. So this is an important issue, right? I'm going to do one more and then I want to talk about what we mean by engagement. One of the most effective ways to engage your employees is understand, endorse, and acknowledge their strengths. Reality, right? Again, this comes from the work of Gallup, and but also here on USC campus, Jody Tolan has done some recent studies. This used to be provocative, you know, but if we were in the 1990s, early 2000s, we still sort of tried to make everybody equal by putting people through training and development classes. You know, it's kind of like sending fish to flying school and birds to swimming class. What we know now is there's all of this talent within individuals. We do our best when we're maximizing the talents and strengths of those individuals. The greatest positive influence on employee development is an organization's learning culture. So learning culture is, we're agile, right? We have a safe, trusting place where it's okay to make mistakes and we learn from them. That's extremely important, but it's not the greatest. The greatest, does my boss take interest in my personal development? Is somebody paying attention to what I want to be when I grow up? And so if we think about this now during these times of challenge when we're working remotely, there actually might be capacity for allowing to take things like this, webinars, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, take an executive education class, sorry for the commercial. But are we allowing people to develop themselves? And more importantly, am I having conversations about that development? And so let's say somebody took a webinar, talk about how does that impact your thinking? Do you think you can use that on the job? Don't just let it be, hey, I attended this webinar, that webinar, but have those actual conversations. So here's the net on all of this. You know, we used to measure employee satisfaction. Are you satisfied at work? Are you kidding? I love this place. I come at 9, I leave at 5. We have dry cleaners in the lobby. I got a Starbucks. This is a great place. Satisfaction tells us nothing about this effort, this discretionary output. So when we're measuring engagement, it's, am I willing to go that extra mile? So this is why it's such a critically important thing to be measuring, and why SAP knows, for example, as a corporation, the importance of leaders paying attention to this measurement. I had one leader describe it to me and he said, Tim, I had this one boss who, if they said, you know what, we need to dig a ditch and all we have are these plastic spoons, I would have said, how deep and how far do you need it? That's the inspiration that leaders can provide to impact engagement. Real quickly, I do want to clarify, you know, we hear a lot about managers and leaders. And again, if we were to have gone through an MBA in the 1990s, you would have been taught that managers are executors, right? They do everything on the left-hand side, and leaders, you know, CEOs are the ones that set strategy and vision. We have these commonalities of communicating, problem-solving, decision-making, but there was this real dichotomy. What we're seeing now that we've made that shift, right, to where we are more on the service economy, we're seeing a much more of a yin and yang effect. There's much more of this blend. Leadership is being pushed down into the organization. So you, of course, know that you have to be a great inspirer, right? Instill bold shared vision. Even if you're a project manager, you've got to build incredible teams. So you're a builder. You're also a catalyst. You're also a coach. So this idea that I'm both a manager and a leader is now happening lower and lower in the organization. And so we need skills and capabilities in both. So when you go back to these slides, I want you to spend a little bit of time on this one and say, where are my opportunities to be better at one of these four? We definitely know that coaching cultures are the highest organizations that demonstrate the highest performance and engagement. Warren Bennis probably said it best though, and Warren of course was here at USC. He was a preeminent thought leader in the area of leadership development. There are only two ways of being creative. One, you can sing and dance, or you can create an environment in which singers and dancers flourish. So are you, again, back to the leadership pipeline and letting go, are you creating that space to allow others to be the ones to have, the accolades for actually doing the singing and dancing? High performing teams, this one's a really good one. Do we have the same per level of performance with or without written goals? It's a myth. And it used to be that there were all kinds of references to studies from Harvard and Yale that said, oh, written goals, those studies don't actually exist. So Dominican University actually just completed the definitive study on this topic. And here's what they found. Those who wrote their goals actually accomplished significantly more than those who did not write goals. But here's the important part. Those that committed to the goals and shared them with someone else had better performance than those that didn't write them or just wrote them. But of course, the golden nugget is accountability. I not only write them, I've shared them, so I've publicly committed, but then I check up with somebody who says, am I making accomplishments towards the goals that I committed to? So we see this, all the time now, right? There are several apps for weight loss that abide by this. Anybody that has tried a fitness with a personal coach, right? My coach is going to keep me accountable. Am I actually doing things on a daily and weekly basis that I committed to? So in these times that we're working from home, here's a tool that we're going to recommend that gives you the capability to be checking in and making sure that we're kind of tying into these three concepts. A little bit of history though. Jack Welch, GE, famous leader, thought leader around leadership and management, had something he called MBOs, management by objectives. Pretty good, grew GE based on those. The challenge is you wrote them and then you checked in on them, usually at the annual performance appraisal, and most of them were written for executives on whether or not they got their bonuses. Well, Andy Grove took what Jack Welch had started when he went to Intel, and he invented something and improved upon it that he calls OKRs, objectives and key results. And here's the advantage to objectives and key results. Instead of waiting a whole year, there are these periods of check-in. I'm constantly checking in to see if we're making progress, back to sort of that public commitment and checking in on the accountability. So real quickly, in our remaining moments, I want to introduce John Doerr, who then took Andy Grove's concepts and really refined it for us to get good at these. One of his key statements is, and this goes back to our executives saying we're not very good at performance management. He said, I have found that leaders really are not good at this whole piece of alignment, feedback, development, and recognition. And so the whole purpose of OKRs, objectives and key results, are to help us be better at these things. So here we are. Objectives are the what to accomplish, right? They could be committed or aspirational. What we mean by committed is kind of that weight loss thing. I commit to it and I'm going to work on the key results. Aspirational might be, I want to become, a CEO of an organization someday. A little bit more time to take to be aspirational. Here's an example. Put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. A business example might be increase EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, and assessments, by 12% by fiscal year close. Now, the key results are the how we get there. And this is the real differentiator. If your organization uses SMART goals, SMART really helps us write a good, solid objective, but it even still lacks in those incremental sort of stages. I think of the objective as kind of the after the fact, right? Do we get at the destination? While the key results are the milestones along the way, which give us check-in points. So for the go to the moon, the key result might be build a lunar module weighing under 40,000 pounds by December 1965. For that business goal or objective, increase service tech reports time by 10 minutes. This actually came with a client that I was in tech sector, and what they found was to reduce costs, if they could decrease the amount of time technicians spent at each job site, they could increase or lower the cost, which increases their EBITDA. And what they ended up doing was giving their technicians tablets that they could easily access tech manuals and resources. They ended up reducing their time, and they exceeded their objective. In closing then on OKRs, this is sort of the framework that, that John recommends. You write the objective as measured by, and then your 3 key results. No more than 5 objectives in a quarter, each with 5 or fewer key results. The idea is we don't want to boil the ocean. You need to keep those key results measurable within a reasonable time period. And so think about this while we're in remote working. This is a great way to keep engagement high, because you're now able to do regular check-ins on milestone things that we can do while we are in this sort of isolation period. Well, I know I'm coming up in the end of my time. Just to give you one more resource. To be able to do those check-ins, I turned to Alan Fine, who's at Inside Out Development. He was one of the co-creators of the GROW model, if you do GROW coaching. And I love his methodology. He says, keep it simple. He doesn't like to overcomplicate things. When I'm checking in with folks, to keep that emotional trigger low, ask 3 simple questions. So I'm checking in on a key result. Hey, what's working? Are you getting stuck anywhere? What might you do differently as a result of it? This accomplishes a couple of things. It's neutral. It's not accusatory. I'm not saying, what did you do wrong? I'm saying, hey, are you getting stuck anywhere? You need any help from me? What might we do differently? But it also allows you to have those conversations on that frequent basis. By the way, you can also do it with feedback, and you just change the tense. What worked? Where did you get stuck? What would you have done differently? Well, in wrapping this up, first of all, again, thank you for your time. But I also want to make sure, are you taking care of yourself? Are you taking care of your own resilience, your own mindfulness? Do you have someone that you can turn to and talk about what's going on? Because to be able to do all of these things that I've suggested that drive great engagement, they don't work if we ourselves aren't taking care of ourselves as leaders. With that, I will turn it back over to Jenny to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Our next webinar is April 30th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it will be hosted by Allison Horstmeyer, one of our other exec ed colleagues. And it's on managing biases, unlocking curiosity. So if you're curious, I suggest you check in. Once again, we will be sending out the webinar, the recording, and slides and resource sheet by end of day tomorrow. We do have a couple minutes. Tim's online, so if you'd like to stick around and ask us any questions, we're here. And once again, just on behalf of the USC Marshall School Business Executive Education Team, thank you for your time on this Wednesday afternoon. You could have been anywhere, but you're here with us. So thank you.